Alien Baron gave him his paralyzed daughter as a joke. He saw her true worth. HFY Sci-Fi story. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The night sky above Vorn. 3 flickered with purple lightning as Calen Rourke trudged across the blasted ridge, the metallic dust crunching under his boots like shattered glass. His breath fogged inside his cracked visor, and his handheld scanner sputtered with static, its battery down to a single blinking bar. A gust of wind carried the smell of burnt wiring and oxidized metal, the scent that always followed a battlefield long after the fighting stopped. Calen adjusted the strap on the battered rifle slung across his shoulder, muttering to himself, "Another day, another job that doesn't pay enough." His voice sounded dull inside the helmet, swallowed by the distant rumble of failing starship engines buried somewhere under the rubble. A pulse beacon hummed on his wrist display, guiding him toward the citadel where his payment supposedly waited. He didn't trust barons, especially alien barons, but credits were credits, and his ship needed parts before it fell apart mid-flight. By the time he reached the towering obsidian gates of Lord Serai Threx's compound, his legs ached from the mile-long climb, and the thin, metallic air made his lungs feel like they were breathing through aluminum foil. The gates hissed open on their own, revealing a hall of cold blue fire torches and polished metal floors that reflected Calen's tired figure like a funhouse mirror. Alien guards in crystalline armor flanked the walkway, their glowing halberds humming with low-frequency energy. Calen fought the urge to raise his hands. They didn't look like the type to appreciate nervous gestures. Lord Serai lounged on a throne made of interlocking titanium blades, his emerald skin shimmering beneath the shifting torchlight. His lips curled into a smile that never touched his silver eyes. "Human," he said, his voice resonating as if the walls themselves amplified him. "You survived. Impressive, considering your kind tends to break easily." Calen resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "The raiders are gone. The ridge is clear. I did the job. Now I need my payment before my ship decides it hates gravity." Serai snapped his fingers. 2 guards disappeared behind a sliding metal door. When they returned, they pushed a floating gurney. Calen's brows pulled together. On it lay a young alien woman, Serai Threx, her skin pale jade, shimmering almost like frost under the torchlight. Her long white hair spilled over her shoulders like braided moonlight, but her legs lay still beneath her, bound in metallic braces from the waist down. Her eyes opened slowly, burning with humiliation and fury. Serai spread his arms theatrically. "Payment. As promised." Calen blinked. "You're kidding." "My daughter," the Baron said with a shrug. "Broken merchandise. Useless to my house, useless to my legacy. Consider her compensation." Serai's voice came out sharp, like broken crystal. "I am not compensation. I am not anything you decide, father." Serai silenced her with a flick of his hand. "Take her or leave with nothing, human. I won't repeat myself." Calen clenched his jaw. He'd seen cruelty before, but something about the casual way Serai dismissed his own daughter tightened his chest. He looked down at Serai, those fierce silver eyes staring back at him, daring him to look away from her pain. "You treat her like junk," Calen said quietly. Serai chuckled. "Because she is." Calen exhaled slowly, the metal-tinted air burning his throat. Against every instinct screaming at him to walk away and avoid trouble, he stepped forward, rested a hand on the gurney's rail, and said, "All right. I'll take her." Serai's eyes widened, not with gratitude, but with stunned disbelief, as if she couldn't imagine why a human would reach for something her own father had thrown away. And though Calen didn't know it yet, this single choice, this moment of stubborn, tired, ordinary human decency, was about to change the fate of an empire. Calen barely had time to register the weight of what he had just done before the guards shoved the floating gurney toward him. The crystal armor on their shoulders hummed with a cold warning, as if daring him to change his mind. Serai's silver eyes locked on his with a fierce, wounded pride. She looked like someone who had forgotten how to ask for help, and Calen looked like someone who had forgotten how to walk away. He gripped the rail of the gurney and began pushing her toward the exit, his boots echoing across the polished metal floor. The torches flickered behind him, casting tall blue shadows that seemed to chase them down the hall. When the giant doors hissed open, a blast of cold desert wind hit them both, carrying dust that tasted like scorched iron. Calen adjusted the controls on the gurney to stabilize its levitation, muttering, "Hang on. The terrain is rough out here." Serai scoffed quietly. "Do you believe I am fragile, human? I have survived worse than a bit of wind." Her voice trembled just slightly, betraying the truth that her body was far more exhausted than she wanted him to know. Calen did not argue. He simply angled the gurney's shield plate to block the worst of the sand as they moved down the slope toward his ship, which waited like a dying animal in the dim valley light. The vessel, the Starling, was dented along the starboard hull, with carbon scoring stitched across its side like old battle scars. The ramp groaned under its own weight when Calen forced it down manually. "You live in this," Serai remarked, her tone halfway between disgust and curiosity. "It is warmer on the inside," Calen replied, "and it does not judge." He eased the gurney into the cargo bay, securing it with magnetic clamps before kneeling beside her. Serai's breathing quickened slightly as the shift in gravity pulled on the braces around her waist. Calen reached for the straps to adjust them, but she jerked her hand up and slapped his wrist away. "Do not touch me." Calen paused. The anger in her eyes was sharp, but underneath it he saw something else. Fear, tightly coiled like a spring. "Slowly," he said. "The braces are pressing into your ribs. I can loosen them. That is all." She hesitated, jaw clenched. Then, as if the decision burned her pride, she nodded once. Calen worked carefully, not speaking, letting the quiet fill the small cargo bay. The only sounds were the low hum of the Starling's failing power core and Serai's controlled breathing. When the last strap loosened, she exhaled a breath she had been holding for far too long. "Why did you take me?" she whispered. "My father discards what he cannot control. You should have done the same." Calen leaned against a storage crate, wiping metallic dust from his gloves. "Because you are not trash," he said simply. "And because I am tired of seeing good people thrown away by powerful ones who think they own everything." Serai looked away sharply, her white hair falling like a curtain of moonlight to hide her expression. The ship's console beeped twice, warning that the outer patrol was sweeping the canyon. Calen pushed himself up and moved to the cockpit. "We need to leave now," he called back. "Your father will not like that I said yes." "He does not like anything that denies him control," Serai replied, her voice cold. As the engines sputtered to life, the ground beneath them shook from distant artillery. Calen gripped the controls tighter. "He is going to come after you, is he not?" "He will come after you," Serai corrected softly. "You embarrassed him in front of his own guard. He will not tolerate that." The Starling lifted shakily from the ground, dust spiraling beneath it like a dying storm. As they rose into the night sky, Serai watched Calen's hands on the controls, steady despite the danger. She frowned, confused at something she could not yet name. "Human," she said quietly, "you made a mistake taking me." Calen did not look back. "I make mistakes all the time," he said. "Some are just worth it." Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under the violet sky, and somewhere behind them, the Baron's wrath was beginning to stir like a storm that refused to die. The Starling climbed through the violet haze as Calen pushed the old ship harder than it had been flown in years. Warning lights flickered across the console in angry red bursts, each one reflecting in his visor like small explosions. Behind him, strapped into the modified gurney, Serai watched with her jaw tense and her hands gripping the rails, the metallic braces on her lower body barely holding steady as the turbulence shook them both. Calen steadied the ship with a firm pull on the control yoke and said, "If we can clear the canyon wall, we can mask our signature in the thermal clouds." Serai narrowed her silver eyes at the oscillating gauges. "Your ship is barely holding together. My father's scouts will sense the engine vibrations before you even leave the atmosphere." Calen gave a short breath through his teeth. "Then we will just have to move faster than they expect." The moment he said it, the proximity alarm shrieked with a sharp metallic whine, the kind that made his spine tighten. The sensors displayed 3 fast-moving heat signatures closing in. Serai's voice dropped to a whisper. Baron-class interceptors. He sent his personal hunters. Calen muttered. Of course he did. He pushed the thrusters to maximum, and the Starling lurched forward so hard that the cargo crates rattled in their straps. Sparks flared from the starboard panel as the ancient wiring complained under the sudden load. The interceptors dropped into view like shadows tearing through the sky, their angular wings cutting clean lines through the thermal fog. Blue tracking lasers flickered over the Starling's hull, sweeping across the cockpit window in ghostly patterns. Calen lowered the ship quickly, skimming the jagged rock formations of the canyon below until the hull almost kissed the stone. You are going to kill us, Serai said, her hands gripping the rails tighter as the hull scraped sparks off a protruding ridge. Only if I do this wrong, Calen replied, his voice calm in a way that irritated her. The ship banked sharply, the metal groaning as if it would tear apart, and the canyon opened into a hollow basin where old mining towers still stood, their metal skeletons reaching into the sky like broken fingers. Calen guided the Starling between the ruins, weaving through the fractured beams and dead machinery. The interceptors followed closely, their engine howls vibrating through the cockpit. Serai watched them, her sharp gaze calculating. They are not firing, she said slowly. They do not want me dead. My father wants me retrieved intact, to punish me himself. Calen exhaled. That is comforting. Serai's tone darkened. It should not be. A blaster shot finally cracked through the air, searing past the Starling's nose and lighting the cockpit in a flash of white. Another bolt clipped the port wing, and the ship spun before Calen wrestled it back under control. I thought you said he wanted you alive, Calen shouted. The hunters do not always listen, Serai snapped. They think pleasing my father means eliminating anyone who embarrasses him. Another bolt hit the hull, sending a shudder through the ship. The lights flickered. The navigation grid went dark for a second before sputtering back to life. Calen's fingers flew across the console, rerouting power from non-essential systems. The dampener screens lit up in a shaky glow. We need cover, he said. Serai pointed ahead. There. The steam vents. The heat signatures from below the surface will blind their sensors. Calen swerved toward the cluster of geothermal vents where plumes of white vapor blasted upward with enough force to peel paint. As the Starling entered the fog, the engines coughed, and the entire ship trembled like a wounded animal. The interceptors circled outside the cloud bank, unable to lock on. Calen held the ship steady with small, deliberate movements. Inside the vapor, everything dimmed to a soft gray, the world reduced to the faint hum of the engines and Serai's uneven breathing. After a long moment, she asked quietly, Why risk this for me? You could have left me in that hall. Calen kept his eyes forward. Because no one deserves to be handed over like a broken tool. And because someone should have taken you out of that place a long time ago. Serai stared at him, her pride warring with something softer. You are a fool, human, she said, though her voice lacked its earlier bite. Calen allowed himself a small smile. I hear that a lot. Outside, the cloud began to thin, and Serai's eyes narrowed with sudden alertness. Calen, she said sharply. They are repositioning above the vents. They are preparing a net formation. Calen's hands tightened on the controls. Then we break upward before they seal it. He hit the thrusters again, and the Starling shot upward through the last veil of steam, engines screaming, as the interceptors closed in like wolves around prey. The chase was far from over, but for the first time, Serai looked at Calen not with suspicion or anger, but with a faint and reluctant flicker of trust. The Starling burst out of the steam vents with a violent shudder, its hull rattling like an old metal drum as Calen forced the engines to climb. The sky above was a deep violet streaked with thin electrical storms that danced across the upper atmosphere in jagged white cracks. Serai held the side rail of her gurney, her knuckles pale as she watched the interceptors regroup in the distance, their sleek wings angling like predatory birds lining up for a final strike. Calen pushed the throttle forward, feeling the vibration. Crawl up his arms as the ship groaned under the sudden acceleration. If they close that net, we are done, he said, eyes locked on the scanner that flickered between clarity and static. Serai's silver gaze sharpened, calculating the distance, the angles, the timing. They will trap us in a containment field. Their formation is designed to disable engines without damaging the target. My father does not want me dead. He only wants you dead. Calen muttered, great. I feel very appreciated. The interceptors split into a triangular pattern, beams of faint blue energy connecting between them like threads of glowing silk. The net formation was tightening. The Starling's proximity alarm screamed again, sharp enough to stab through both their skulls. Calen yanked the ship into a steep climb, the engines coughing as the air thinned. Serai gripped the rail harder as the gravity shift pressed her into the gurney. This ship cannot take a high-angle burst, she warned. Calen gave a half-smile she could not see. It does not have to. It just has to hold long enough. The ship shot upward, cutting through a cluster of luminous clouds where charged particles shimmered like drifting ice. For a moment, the world outside looked like a storm of falling stars. Then the first interceptor broke formation and dove toward them. Serai's eyes widened. They are adjusting. They will form a compressed net directly above us. Calen's jaw tightened, his fingers moving fast across the controls. He rerouted the remaining power from the rear shield to the forward thrusters, forcing the engines to flare brighter. The ship lurched forward, riding the violent kick of raw energy. Serai gasped at the sudden jolt. You are burning out the regulators. That is suicide. Calen replied. Only if it does not work. The Starling shot ahead just as the net closed behind them, crackling like a spherical cage of lightning. The energy field snapped shut inches from the ship's tail, close enough that the static made the hull pop and hiss. The interceptors screeched past, recalibrating. For a breathless moment, they had escaped. But then the console glowed orange. Calen cursed under his breath. Overheating stabilizers. We need to cool the drive before it melts. Serai scanned the readouts. There is a canyon system to the west. The temperature drop inside will counteract the overload. But it is unstable. Most of the walls have collapsed from mining blasts. Calen adjusted their course. We will take the risk. The Starling dipped toward the planet's surface, descending into the shadows of the ravine. Jagged formations of black stone jutted upward like the ribs of some ancient beast. The temperature dropped instantly, fog spilling across the cockpit glass. Calen guided the ship between the narrow walls, relying mostly on instinct and the faint outlines highlighted by the dim sensor grid. Serai felt every vibration through the metal under her, each tremor sending a ripple of pain through her braced legs. Still, she kept her voice steady. You fly like someone who has nothing to lose. Calen replied softly. I fly like someone who refuses to leave anyone behind. She stared at him, silent, confused by the sincerity in his tone. No one from her world spoke that way. No one she had known ever meant it. The canyon grew darker, the rock walls towering above them, blocking out the sky entirely. Only the dull glow of the ship's underside lights illuminated the swirling fog. The drive temperature finally began to fall, the red indicator flashing slower, then fading to yellow. Serai let out a breath she had held for too long. We bought ourselves a moment. Calen nodded. Then we use it. But even as he said it, both of them heard it. A distant metallic echo, bouncing across the canyon walls. Serai's voice dropped to a whisper. Calen, that is not a natural sound. The echo came again, closer this time, followed by a low mechanical pulse that vibrated through the ground beneath them. Calen swallowed hard. They sent ground hunters. Serai closed her eyes. My father will not stop, Calen. He will tear this entire planet apart before he lets me go. Calen steadied his grip on the controls. Then we make sure he cannot find you. For the first time since they met, Serai did not argue. And in the dim glow of the canyon, something unspoken passed between them, something quiet but heavy, like a promise neither of them knew they had already made. The canyon air grew colder as the Starling drifted deeper into the shadows, its underside lights glowing weakly against the jagged stone walls. The distant mechanical pulse echoed again, bouncing through the ravine like the heartbeat of something massive and metal stalking just out of sight. Calen tightened his grip on the controls, guiding the ship along the narrow path until he spotted a ledge wide enough to set the Starling down without exposing them to the open sky. The landing struts groaned as they touched the uneven ground, and the engines wound down with a rattling sigh that sounded almost relieved. Serai watched him power down the remaining systems, her silver eyes tracking every movement. Are you certain stopping is wise? She asked quietly. We are vulnerable if they locate us. Calen nodded. We need to cool the drive before it seizes, and we need to get you off that gurney for a minute. The turbulence cannot be helping your legs. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, something like surprise mixed with irritation. My condition is not your concern. Calen glanced back at her, the dim cockpit lights reflecting in his visor. If it affects your life, it is my concern. He moved to the cargo bay and unlocked the rail clamps that held her gurney in place. The soft click echoed loudly in the silence. Serai instinctively straightened her posture as the gurney adjusted, but a strain of pain crossed her features before she could hide it. Calen noticed, his voice lowering. Your braces are binding again. She inhaled sharply. Because the ship has been thrown around like a toy. Calen reached for the adjustment latches, but paused with his hand hovering over the straps. May I? For a moment, Serai did not answer. Her pride fought the question, but the ache in her legs broke through first. She nodded once, never looking away from him. Calen began loosening the metal braces along her hips and thighs, working with careful precision. The cold metal clicked softly with each adjustment. As the pressure eased, Serai's breath trembled. She whispered, these devices were never meant to heal me. They were designed to keep me immobile, compliant, unable to flee my father's estate. Calen froze for a second, the realization twisting something deep in his chest. He did this to you on purpose. Serai nodded, her expression cold. My father controls through weakness. The moment I was injured, he ensured I would never rise again. Calen's hands tightened on the last buckle, anger cutting through him like a blade. He is not going to control you anymore. Before Serai could respond, the metallic pulse echoed again, louder now, followed by the crunch of heavy steps against stone. Calen moved toward the loading ramp and shut down the external lights. Darkness swallowed the inside of the ship, leaving only the faint glow of emergency indicators. Serai strained to listen. That sound is not a patrol. It is a seeker unit. My father rarely deploys them. Calen whispered, what are they? Trackers. They follow biosignatures. Once locked, they do not stop. Calen exhaled slowly, thinking. Then we need to confuse it. He rushed to a storage crate and pulled out a thermal blanket, wrapping it around Serai's lower body to mask her temperature imprint. Then he grabbed 2 old power cells and shoved them inside a metal canister before tossing it out the rear hatch. The clattering noise echoed down a side tunnel. The approaching seeker paused, its pulse growing sharper and faster as it recalibrated. Serai watched Calen with something new in her eyes, something softer than before. You are risking your life for a decoy. Calen replied. Better the decoy than you. The seeker let out a mechanical shriek as it detected the false signature, its metal steps pounding away toward the noise. Calen waited several heartbeats before letting out a slow breath. We bought a little time. Serai studied him, her voice barely above a whisper. You do not even know me, yet you fight as if my life is worth everything. Calen met her gaze without hesitation. It is. Her breath caught, but she looked away, shielding her expression with a curtain of white hair. Outside, the canyon settled into an eerie quiet. For the first time since the chase began, there was no alarm, no blaster fire, no rumbling engines. Only the cold air and the dim hum of the Starling's cooling systems filled the silence. Calen sat on the edge of a supply crate, rubbing tiredness from his eyes. We are safe for the moment, he said. Serai turned her face toward him, the faint blue glow of the cockpit lights painting her features with a fragile softness. Human, she said quietly. I do not understand you. Calen gave a tired half-smile. It is all right. Most people do not. Serai held his gaze, and for the first time, there was no anger, no suspicion, only a small, trembling seed of trust growing in the space between them. The silence inside the canyon felt heavier after the seeker's footsteps faded. The Starling's dim emergency lights pulsed softly against the metal walls, casting shifting shadows across Serai's pale jade skin as she adjusted herself on the gurney. Calen checked the scanners again, their green lines wavering and stabilizing as the heat signatures normalized. He rubbed a hand across his tired eyes and let out a slow breath. We need a plan, he said quietly. Your father will send more than a seeker if that one fails to return. Serai watched him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You speak of plans, she said softly. But you have not asked the question that every other person would have asked by now. Calen looked back at her. What question? Serai lowered her gaze, her white hair falling over her shoulders like strands of cold fire. Why I am worth all of this? Calen frowned. I do not need a reason to help someone who is being hunted by their own family. Serai's voice sharpened. That is not how my world works. Where I come from, everything has a price. Everything is a transaction. Even life. Calen leaned back against the control panel, shaking his head. Then your world is broken. Serai studied him with a long, searching look. Perhaps. But my father believes he is fixing it by force. Calen sensed the weight behind her words and chose to sit beside her, lowering himself onto an old equipment crate. The hull creaked quietly as he shifted. Serai, he said, keeping his voice level. Tell me what he wants with you besides control. She hesitated, her silver eyes flicking away as if the canyon walls themselves might overhear. At last, she spoke. My injury happened 3 years ago, during a shuttle accident. At least, that is the story the public knows. In truth, my father caused the malfunction so that I would never be able to claim his title. Calen's brows knit tightly. He crippled his own daughter to keep power? Serai nodded slowly. On my world, leadership is passed to the physically strongest heir. I had grown too influential, too well-liked by the lower houses. He saw me as a threat. Calen felt anger coil through him like a tightening spring. You deserved better than that. Serai's voice softened with a bitter edge. Deserving does not exist in my father's empire. The console gave a soft beep as the cooling cycle completed. The faint hum of the stabilizers returned with a steady rhythm. Calen stood and moved toward the maintenance hatch. If we can get the ship flying again, we need to get you off this planet. Somewhere he has no reach. Serai's expression tensed. There is nowhere beyond his reach. He controls the surrounding systems. Even if we escape Vorn 3, his influence spreads farther than you imagine. Calen crouched near the hatch and removed the access panel, exposing the glowing coils beneath. Then we outrun him long enough to find a place he cannot enter. He glanced back with a faint, tired smile. Everyone has a limit, even tyrants. Serai watched him, her voice barely audible. You speak as if you have faced tyrants before. Calen paused, his shoulders tightening. I have. Her eyes softened. Your world. Calen nodded without looking back. Different names. Same cruelty. For the first time, Serai seemed to understand him not just as a human, but as someone built from scars she recognized in herself. A distant rumble echoed through the canyon, making the starling's frame vibrate. Serai straightened. Calen, that is an atmospheric tremor. Something large is entering the sector. Calen quickly closed the panel and checked the scanners. The display flickered and surged with a massive energy spike. His breath caught. That is a cruiser. Your father sent an entire cruiser. Serai's pulse quickened. He must have detected the Seeker's loss. He will sweep every canyon. Calen moved to her gurney, his voice firm. Then we move now. The drive has cooled. We can risk a short burst to escape the canyon. Serai nodded, but her gaze softened as she studied him. Human, she said quietly. If you leave me here, he will spare you. That is his nature. Calen stared at her for a long, steady moment. I am not leaving you. She swallowed hard, her voice unsteady for the first time. Why? Calen leaned over her gurney, unlocking the clamps with a decisive click. Because whether you believe it or not, Serai, your life matters. And nobody gets to decide otherwise. Serai held his gaze, something fragile breaking free inside her chest. In the dim light of the canyon, the walls seemed to hold their breath as she whispered. No one has spoken to me that way in years. Calen offered his hand to steady her as the engines whirred back to life. Then it is time someone did. The cruiser's shadow crossed overhead, blocking the faint glow of the sky, and Serai's fingers closed around his with trembling trust as the starling prepared to rise into the storm once more. The starling lifted from the canyon floor with a low metallic groan, its engines pushing against the dense air as Calen guided it upward. The cruiser's shadow stretched across the ravine like a giant claw reaching for them, its underbelly lined with glowing vents that pulsed in a deep crimson rhythm. Serai tightened her grip on the rail of her gurney as the ship tilted sharply, her silver eyes fixed on the looming vessel overhead. Calen, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in the hull. That cruiser is equipped with gravity snares. If we ascend too quickly, they will lock onto us. Calen adjusted the controls, his fingers flying across the panels as he rerouted power from the auxiliary systems. So we climb slow and steady. If we keep beneath the thermal layer, their snares will have trouble tracking us. The cruiser's engines let out a deep, resonant thrum that made the canyon walls vibrate. Serai's gaze hardened. My father is aboard that ship. He never leaves his estate unless he is furious. Calen muttered. Then we better not give him time to cool down. The scanner beeped in warning. 3 new signatures appeared on the display, approaching fast. Serai inhaled sharply. Shock troopers. He has deployed ground-to-air units to force us up into the snares. Calen cursed under his breath. Of course he has. The first blast came from below, a bolt of crackling energy that lit the canyon in a violent white flash and shook the Starling sideways. Calen wrestled with the controls, stabilizing the ship, just as another bolt carved a glowing scar across the stone beneath them. Serai braced herself as the ship lurched. They are firing without precision. My father does not care if they hit me anymore. Calen shot her a quick look. He is not hitting you. Not while I am here. He jerked the Starling into a sharp bank, dodging another blast. The engines screamed in protest. Sparks burst from a nearby panel, showering the cockpit in a brief shower of red-orange light. Calen reached under the console, yanking out a burning cable and stopping it flat. We cannot take much more of this, he said. We need cover. Serai tilted her head, listening beyond the roar of the engines. There is a thermal fissure ahead. It vents superheated air from beneath the crust. If we enter the plume at the right angle, the sudden heat spike may confuse the gravity snares. Calen nodded. Then, that is where we are going. He aimed the ship toward a jagged crack in the canyon wall where faint orange light pulsed like the heartbeat of the planet. The temperature gauges climbed rapidly as they approached, warning indicators flashing. This is going to hurt, Calen muttered. The Starling plunged into the fissure just as another shock trooper fired. The blast struck the canyon wall instead, sending a shower of molten rock raining behind them. Inside the fissure, the air shimmered with oppressive heat, making the hull creak and expand. Calen's visor fogged slightly as the temperature spiked. Serai clung to the rail, her breath shallow from the sudden heat. Hold steady, she said. The snares will lose us any second. The scanner flickered as the ship passed the thermal peak. Then, suddenly, the gravity net signature blinked out. Calen exhaled. We did it. But the relief lasted only a moment. A deafening roar thundered through the fissure as the cruiser descended lower, its massive engines causing the entire canyon to shake. Serai's expression hardened. He is bringing the cruiser down manually. He intends to seal the fissure. Calen realized the truth with sinking dread. He is going to crush us. Serai locked eyes with him, her voice firm and unyielding. Calen, listen to me. There is an emergency exhaust shaft that leads directly beneath the cruiser's hull. If we rise through it, we will appear so close to the ship that the snares will not activate. But the shaft is narrow. If your ship slips even a few inches, we will be vaporized by the heat jets. Calen's jaw set with determination. We are doing it. The Starling rose through the fissure, weaving upward as the temperature soared. Warning alarms wailed. The hull glowed faintly from the heat. Serai held on as the ship scraped through the narrow passage, sparks flying off the metal exterior. Just as the cruiser sealed the canyon, Calen pushed the throttle forward with everything the engine had left. The Starling shot upward through the exhaust shaft and burst out into the open air directly beneath the cruiser's massive belly. Both of them froze as they stared at the colossal undercarriage just meters above their heads, glowing vents and towering metal plates stretching endlessly. Serai's voice trembled with disbelief. Calen, no one has ever flown beneath a Dominion cruiser and lived. Calen gave a strained smile, sweat beading on his brow. Then let us be the first. Serai's breath caught as she looked at him, realization dawning that he was risking everything, including his own life, for her. Above them, the cruiser's alarms began to wail, signaling that something had gone very, very wrong. And in that suspended moment beneath the belly of a monster, Serai understood that Calen's courage was not born from duty or desperation, but from a kind of human decency her world had never believed existed. The alarms from the Dominion cruiser blared overhead, vibrating through the thin air as Calen kept the Starling pinned dangerously close to the ship's underbelly. The metal plates above them glowed with shifting patterns of red and blue as the cruiser's systems scrambled to understand why a vessel was hovering inches from its hull. Heat ripples distorted the air, making everything shimmer. Serai gripped the rail of her gurney, her breath tight and uneven. "Calen, we cannot stay here. The cruiser will reroute its vents. They will try to burn us off." Calen steadied the controls, sweat trailing down his temples despite the cold draft filtering through the failing ventilation system. "I know. We have only a few seconds before they figure out what we are doing." The scanner flickered again before locking onto a glowing weak point near the cruiser's aft section. Calen narrowed his eyes. "If we hit that access port and overload its external stabilizers, the cruiser will lose altitude long enough for us to escape underneath." Serai stared at the flashing marker, realization dawning. "You want to disable my father's flagship." Calen corrected her calmly. "I want to disable its ability to hunt you." Serai's voice dropped, trembling without her permission. "Calen, that is an act of rebellion. If you strike his ship, he will never stop coming for you." Calen kept his gaze forward, his voice low but steady. He was never going to stop anyway. Another violent tremor rattled the Starling as the cruiser began adjusting its vent systems. Bright light built within the exhaust rings above them, glowing like a second sun preparing to ignite. Serai's eyes widened in pure fear. "Calen, the vents are charging. If they fire now, we will be incinerated." Calen punched the throttle, sending the Starling forward in a sharp burst that scraped the hull against the cruiser's armor. Sparks rained over the windshield like falling stars. He lined the ship up with the flickering access port. "Hold on," he muttered. The Starling rammed the port with a deafening metallic crack. The shockwave threw both of them sideways. Serai gasped as pain shot through her legs, her braces rattling violently. The cruiser shuddered overhead, lights flickering across its massive frame. A second, deeper vibration followed as the stabilizers malfunctioned, emitting a long, keening hum that echoed through the canyon below. Serai stared up at the trembling giant of a vessel, disbelief softening her sharp features. "Calen, you damaged a Dominion cruiser. Alone, in a ship that barely holds together." Calen managed a breathless grin. "It is not about the size of the ship. It is about how stupid you are willing to be." But then the smile faded as the cruiser slowly tilted, exposing a massive landing bay. A column of armored guards spilled out, their weapons glowing. And at their center, tall and cloaked in obsidian fabric, stood Lord Vadran himself. Serai's breath stopped in her throat. "My father." Vadran stepped to the edge of the bay, looking down at the Starling with a fury so cold it felt like ice. His amplified voice boomed across the sky. "Serai Threx, you will surrender yourself immediately." Serai recoiled as if struck. Calen gripped the controls tighter. "You do not have to listen to him." Vadran's voice deepened. "You are my daughter. My legacy. You belong to me." Serai's hands trembled violently. The words were chains she had worn for years. Chains Calen was watching her struggle to break. Calen said softly, "Serai, look at me." She forced her gaze away from her father and toward the human sitting before her, the one who had risked everything for her without asking anything in return. Calen's eyes held steady fire. "You do not belong to him. You do not belong to anyone. You choose who you are." For the first time, the cold, polished veneer of royalty around her cracked, revealing something raw and real beneath. She whispered, "I want to be free." Vadran's roar shook the sky. "You are mine." Serai's silver eyes hardened, and her voice rose with more strength than she believed she still had. "I am not your property. I am Serai Threx, heir by blood and right, and I choose my own path." Her declaration ignited shockwaves through the cruiser's sensors. Vadran froze, stunned by the defiance he had believed long dead in her. Calen saw the opening and shouted, "Hold on." He drove the Starling downward into a steep dive just as Vadran ordered his guards to fire. Blaster bolts tore through the air behind them, carving scorching trails across the sky. Serai braced herself as the ship rocked violently. For the first time since her injury, she did not feel weak. For the first time since her father crippled her, she felt alive. And as the Starling plunged toward the open horizon, leaving the Dominion cruiser in chaos, Serai realized something profound. Calen had not simply saved her life. He had given her back her voice, her will, and perhaps even her future. The Starling tore across the horizon in a desperate downward arc, the engines screaming as Calen fought to keep the ship stable. Blaster fire streaked past the cockpit like burning comets, each beam lighting Serai's pale face in flashes of red and white. The cruiser above them groaned under the failing stabilizers Calen had damaged, its massive frame listing sideways as alarms echoed through the canyon. Serai clung to the rail of her gurney, her silver eyes tracking every tilt and tremor of the fleeing ship. "Calen, if we stay in open air, they will target us with long-range cannons," she warned, her voice tight but steady. Calen's jaw flexed with focus. "I know. We need terrain cover." The ship dove toward the jagged cliffs ahead, weaving between towering pillars of stone as the sky darkened with smoke from the cruiser's exhaust. A sudden blast struck a nearby ridge, sending molten rock cascading behind them. Serai winced as the heat washed through the open vents. "They are firing to collapse the cliffs," she said. "They want to bury us." Calen jerked the controls hard, narrowly avoiding a raining chunk of glowing debris. "Then we do not give them a clear shot." The Starling plunged into a narrow chasm where the walls rose so tightly that the ship's wings nearly brushed the rock. The shadows swallowed them whole, muffling the distant roar of the cruiser. Only the hum of the engines and Serai's uneven breathing filled the darkness. Calen guided the Starling deeper, slowing the ship until it drifted among the silent stone columns. "This place," Serai whispered, her eyes widening slightly. "This is the Obsidian Expanse. No Dominion vessel enters here." Calen raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Serai's voice softened, reverent and fearful. "Because the terrain is unstable. It shifts with geothermal fractures. Entire patrols have vanished." Calen nodded. "Good. Then your father will not follow." The ship settled onto a flat outcropping of stone, the landing struts groaning softly. Calen powered down the engines. Silence rushed in like a heavy tide. Serai remained still for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The soft glow of the emergency lights painted her features in blue and silver. Calen approached her, unlocking the restraints on her gurney with gentle precision. "You all right?" he asked. Serai searched his face, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am alive because of you." Calen shrugged lightly, though emotion flickered across his expression. "I just did what any decent person would have done." Serai held his gaze with newfound intensity. "No, Calen Rourke. You did what no one in my world has ever done. You risked yourself for me without expecting anything in return." She lowered her eyes briefly, her white hair falling like moonlight around her shoulders. "People like my father believe compassion is weakness, but you have shown me it is strength." Calen offered a small, tired smile. "Sometimes strength is just refusing to let someone suffer alone." Serai's breath caught at the quiet truth in his voice. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The canyon air was still, broken only by the faint whispers of geothermal vents below. Then Serai shifted slightly, as though gathering courage. "Calen," she said softly, "there is something you must know." She raised her hand, pressing her palm to the small sigil embedded at the base of her throat. It pulsed faintly with light. "This is not merely an heir's marking. It contains my genetic authority. If activated fully, it transmits my claim to the Dominion Councils. Even crippled, even hunted, I remain the rightful successor." Calen blinked, surprised. "So you can challenge him?" "Yes," she said, her voice strong now, but not alone. "The moment I send the signal, every loyalist to my father will come for me before the council intervenes. I would not survive the attempt without protection." Calen leaned forward, gripping the edge of her gurney. "Then I will protect you." Her eyes widened slightly, stunned by his immediate certainty. "Calen, this would put you against the entire Dominion hierarchy." Calen gave a slow, determined nod. "Then they will learn what one stubborn human can do." For the first time since her injury, Serai felt something powerful rise in her chest, something her father had tried to crush long ago: hope. She activated the sigil, a soft glow spread across her collarbone, then burst outward in a silent flash of light. Far above the canyon, the cruiser froze mid-descent as every Dominion communicator lit up in alarm. Serai whispered, her voice steady as a vow. "The claim has been made. My father can no longer hide what he did to me." Calen stood beside her, watching the sky darken under the looming shadow of consequence. Serai looked toward him, her voice trembling not with fear, but with truth. Whatever happens next, Calen, I want you to know this. You did not just save me. You gave me back the right to stand, even if I cannot yet walk. A soft wind swept through the canyon, carrying the faint scent of heated stone. Calen met her gaze with quiet strength, his voice barely above a murmur. You stood the moment you chose yourself. Serai's eyes glimmered, reflecting the distant stars now peeking through the fractured sky. And in that silent, breathless moment, between the death of an empire and the birth of her freedom, her expression softened into something human and profound. The stars reflected in her eyes, and for once, they looked almost human.